Hi. You guys ready for this? Crack open your Bibles. We're in the New Testament, the first one of the first book of the New Testament, book of Matthew. Hi, chapter 20 is where we're going to be. Last week we kicked off this series called The Kingdom of Heaven is Like. And where we find this, just to give a little bit of the background here, we find Jesus in the midst of a crowd that is gathered to hear his teachings. And it's in this moment that he's actually decided they're coming not just in the thousands, but potentially somewhere north of 10,000 people have gathered along the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee in this sleepy little fishing town to hear what this man, what this prophet, what some think to be a prophet, what this teacher has to say and teach. And he actually has some of his followers that take him out into a boat, and it's from the boat that he's teaching to the crowd along the shoreline. And on the shoreline, you have these sloping hilltops, and he has an understanding that he's essentially created a natural amphitheater where he's able to speak, and everybody is in a space where they can hear what he has to say. And last week, we were talking about how he began teaching in parables. He began using these stories in order to give an idea of what the kingdom of heaven is like. There's 5 of these parables that begin with the words, the kingdom of heaven is like. And last week we kicked this off with the parable of the sower, of the one who goes out in the field and he has the seed and he casts it onto the ground. And there's different types of ground, there's different types of soil that the seed falls onto. And Jesus is saying, look, this is the gospel message that's being spread, that's being broadcasted out here. Everybody will hear the same message, but not everyone will receive it the same way. And it has nothing to do with the seed because it's the same seed. It has everything to do with the condition of the soil. And so he says, even before I begin with these parables, even before I begin trying to help you understand what the kingdom of heaven is like, be warned that some of you are going to receive this and there will be no reciprocation. There will be no response to it. And then he starts with these different parables, and the synoptic gospels each record these parables, but there's one parable that I want to be focusing on today that's found in Matthew chapter 20. It's found in the book of Matthew, and it's not found in the other gospels. And it's the parable of the workers in the vineyard. And so starting in verse 1, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 a.m, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, 'You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 p.m. and did the same thing. About 5 p.m, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, 'Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?' 'Because no one has hired us,' they answered. He said to them, 'You also go work in my vineyard.' And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, 'Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first.' So the workers who were hired about 5 p.m, the ones who were hired the latest in the day, came and each received a denarius. So when those who were hired first, earlier in the day, at the beginning of the day, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. 'Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour,' they said, 'and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day.' But he answered one of them, 'I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last.'" So this is an interesting story about a wealthy man, a landowner who owns a vineyard. And he goes into the marketplace. And in the marketplace, you have a square, just kind of a public area where you would have laborers. You would have workers that would come and they would wait to be hired. Essentially, they're contracted out to do different jobs. And so every morning, these men would come into the square because they need to be able to provide for their families. They need to be able to make money in order to provide food and meals for their families, but they don't have land of their own. They maybe have a small, modest, humble home where they live with their spouse and their kids. And so what they would do is they would gather up their tools, whatever tools they might possibly need that day, and they would take them with them into the square, into the town square. And there they would stay until somebody came along and needed some workers. Hey, I need 2 workers. I need 3 workers. I need 4 workers. I need you. You look strong. You look capable. Come with me. And so the landowner comes, and early in the morning, so the work day during this time usually goes between about 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. So you have a 12-hour work day. And so he comes early in the morning, and he knows that he needs some workers. He needs some laborers in his vineyard, in his field. And so he comes and he gets some of these laborers, and he says, I'll offer you 1 denarius for a day's work. And a denarius was about the market value for a day's worth of work. And so they decided that sounds perfectly fair. That's perfectly adequate. I'm going to come with you. And then a few hours later, he comes out and he finds some more workers. And he doesn't offer them a denarius right off the bat. He says, hey, I will pay you what is appropriate for the work that you do today. And he comes back 4 different times, each time later and later in the day, until finally the last group of men that he brings into his field, he's up there, and really at this point, there's only about an hour left in the workday. And he says the same thing. He gives them the same offer of, hey, I will pay you what is appropriate. Come work with me. Come work for me. And then at the end of the day, he tells his foreman, bring the men out so that we can pay them. But bring the ones out that we hired last. Bring the men out that we hired latest in the day and pay them first. And so the foreman comes and he lines them up. And the ones that he had gone out and had only worked for a day, he gave them 1 denarius. And as he's handing them that payment, the men who had been hired earlier in the day are looking at that and saying, oh, well, surely we're going to be paid more now because we gave more of ourselves. We gave more of our day because we worked longer hours. We gave more, therefore we should receive more. And yet when it came to them, they were given the same payment as the ones who had only worked about an hour or so. And they start grumbling. And they're like, this is bullcrap. I got the same amount that guy got. And the owner comes out and he simply says, he's like, I paid you what we agreed upon. When I first came to you this morning, I offered you 1 denarius, 1 day's wage. And you said, okay, this is what you're being paid. This is what we agreed upon. And yet you're grumbling against me. Are you jealous at my generosity? Why are you upset? And as Jesus is telling this parable, he's causing the audience, the listeners of this story, to reflect on this a little bit. It's a fascinating parable, and there are 2 actions that we are moved to take when we listen to this, and the first one is this. We should celebrate God's unfairness. Let us establish at the very beginning, God is not fair, and thank goodness for that. Thank Him for that. God is not fair. There's nothing in the Bible that would suggest that He is fair, but this works to your benefit. We see in the parable an arrangement between this landowner and some day laborers who agree to work for a denarius. Those who were hired in the morning agreed upon a denarius for their work. All right? They agreed upon that, and this fact is crucial for understanding the rest of the parable. So the man goes out and he gets more workers. Maybe he needed more workers. Maybe he simply wanted to be generous. But then he lines them up and he pays them. With the first, they agreed upon a denarius payment. With the others, they apparently just trusted the man to pay them what they thought was fair for their work. But they start grumbling amongst themselves. When the ones who had been working all day were paid the same as the ones who had only been working later in the day. Well, if they got a denarius, surely we'll get more. If the ones who have been here a shorter amount of time got a denarius, surely we're going to be given more than what was originally agreed upon. But in fact, verse 10 says, so when the first ones came, they assumed they would get more, but they also received a denarius each. The ones who started working first had begun to set their own expectations for what the landowner owed them, and they thought that they deserved more. So as soon as they see the other workers that had been there, not as long as they had been, receiving their payment, they now have developed their own expectation of what they deserve based on their efforts and based on the time that they have committed to working in the fields. Here's what we must understand. God's grace is not fair. God doesn't owe us anything. The landowner was under no obligation to give those first workers a job at all. He was under no obligation to go out and hire workers. And once he hired those workers and they agreed upon payment, the landowner was under no obligation to pay them above and beyond what they had already agreed upon. Does that make sense? Furthermore, it's the landowner's money. He's free to do with his own money whatever he wants. In verse 15, he says, don't I have the right to do what I want with what is mine? Are you jealous simply because I am generous? I have been generous to you, but now that I have offered generosity to people who you consider to be less deserving of my generosity, now you're angry. Now you're mad. Now you're upset because we say, well, it's not fair. Because life is about fairness. It's about getting what I deserve, and I deserve more. I heard this a few weeks ago, and I loved how he said this. It says, God doesn't owe us salvation for something we have done. He gives us salvation despite everything we have done. That's what grace is. But we have work to do. That work is to faithfully follow after Jesus. No matter when or how God draws us to himself and we start following Jesus, the reward is the same. No matter when you begin following Jesus, no matter when you reciprocate and you receive and you respond to that gift of grace, no matter when it happens, the reward is the same. Eternal blessing and eternity with him. Blessings that we do not deserve. God gives us unearned, unwarranted, and unfair grace, and we do not deserve it. We simply do not deserve any of it. Ephesians 2:8-9 reminds us of this truth. Paul says this. He says, for you are saved by grace through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is God's gift, not from works, so that no one can boast. And in verse 16 of this parable, Jesus says, so the last will be first, and the first will be last. Those who think they deserve more from God may find that they get the same reward as those who only followed Jesus for a little while. However, God is free to give his grace to anyone at any time. And the reward is of the utmost value no matter when we receive it. Here's the key to understanding this. We can't lose sight of the beauty of the reward. We can't lose sight of the beauty of the reward, which is Jesus and eternal life with God. We can't lose sight of that. Because when we get distracted at the grace and the generosity that's being offered to others, we're losing sight of what the ultimate reward is. When we receive that generosity, you know what kills that joy immediately? Comparison. We begin comparing that to the situation of other people and saying, well, why are they receiving the same gift that I'm getting? I'm more deserving, so I should receive more. That's our childish way of thinking. When we receive that gift of grace, when God says, I have sacrificed everything to reconcile you back to me, I have gifted you eternity with me, community and intimacy with me. That's what salvation is. And it's yours forever. I have offered that to you freely. And it's not based on your own works or your own worth. It's my love that gives you worth. And we say, wow, this is great. More, please. I want more eternity than that person. I want more perfection than that person. God, through his Son, reconciles us to him, which means we are made perfect. We are made new. And we take that gift that we have received and we start comparing our situation and our life to others, and we think to ourselves, this is unfair. Everybody's being made perfect. I should be perfecter. You can't have more of what is ultimate and what is infinite. You can't be made more perfect. You can't be given more. And that generosity is his to give. We should celebrate God's unfairness. We don't deserve God's grace, and yet he shares it abundantly simply because it is his to share. There is not a finite amount of grace that he has. He's not portioning up the grace. He's not portioning up the forgiveness. He's not portioning up the love to give to us according to who's more or less deserving of it. He gives all of it because it is his nature to give, because it is his nature to pour out. Oops, I skipped a verse. That's okay though. We should celebrate God's unfairness. God's grace, but here's the thing, God's grace is not only for us, which takes us to the second point. We should share God's unfairness. Not only should we celebrate God's unfairness, but we should be sharing in God's unfairness. So instead of this is kind of something that I've been trying to look at life through this lens over the last week, just in studying this, replacing the word grace with the word unfairness. So I'm not just celebrating in God's grace, I'm celebrating in his unfairness, because ultimately that's what grace is. It's receiving something that I do not deserve. It's receiving something that I did not earn. It's unfair. It's not fair. And thank goodness for that. That's worth celebrating. I say, God, thank you for not being fair. Thank you for not giving me what I deserve. Thank you for giving me what I do not deserve, what I couldn't possibly earn on my own. I celebrate that, but I should also want to share, not just in God's grace, I should want to share God's unfairness. Verses 9 through 12, they say this: when those who were hired about 5 o'clock came, they each received 1 denarius. So when the first ones came, they assumed they would get more, but they also received a denarius each. When they received it, they began to complain to the landowner. These last men put in 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who bore the burden of the day's work and the burning heat. These workers were jealous and upset because of the generosity of the owner. But again, the owner asked in verse 15, are you jealous because I am generous? We should not be jealous of those who receive God's forgiveness. We should not want God's forgiveness and God's blessing and God's reward reserved only for us. We should not only celebrate his blessing, we should share his blessing. We should not only celebrate his grace in our lives, it is our responsibility to share it with others. It's not only for us to receive his unfairness and bask in his unfairness and enjoy his unfairness and celebrate and worship and glorify in his unfairness, but to share his unfairness. It's not wrong to ask God to bless you. It's not wrong to ask God and want God to bless you, but it's wrong to keep it all to yourself when he does. That's not what this walk is about. That's not what this life is about. It's not about saying a prayer of, God, bless my life so that I can be blessed. But instead say the prayer, God, bless me so that I can bless others. Whatever you give me will equip me to give to others. You forgive me so I know I can forgive others. I know that I am equipped to love others well because I have been loved well. I know that I am equipped to forgive because I have been forgiven. I know that I am equipped to extend grace because grace has been extended to me. It's not coming from my own personal well of Spencer grace. It's a supernatural, undeserved, unyielding, unwavering grace that I have been given. And out of an abundance and an overflow of that, I'm able to extend grace, not because you deserve it, but because it was given to me when I didn't deserve it. Do we want to forgive each other? No. Are we called to forgive in spite of that? Yes. Why? Because he forgave you first. Why? Because he loved you first. Why? Because he offered salvation first. Why? Because he reconciled you to him first. So that we can celebrate in that grace, but also so that we can share that grace. If you claim to be saved by grace, but won't celebrate when that same grace is given to others, you're doing it wrong. If being a part of the church is about saying grace for me, but not for thee, that you're doing it wrong. But we decide why, because we're constantly comparing. Well, God offered me grace because, yeah, there's sin in my life, but at least it's not that sin. Sure, I've done bad, I've made mistakes, but I'm not that bad. So grace, it's understandable. Grace given to me is understandable, but I can't make sense of grace being offered to you. So we celebrate in the grace that's been given to us, and yet we're jealous of that same grace that's offered to others because we've decided that they're not deserving of it. Because we've decided that they are not worthy of it. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to go to, it wasn't a convention, but it was a gathering. It was a sponsored gathering. There were pastors and heads of different ministries and churches that got to go and do a trip, like a tour of Washington, D.C. And while we were there was the opportunity to meet with different government officials and actually like go into like the Senate and meet with senators and things like that. And it was just kind of like it was an interesting experience just to kind of get a tour of that space. We were in the Capitol building. We were in different corridors that you're not like supposed to go, but we had special access during this week. And I had the privilege to go because it was fully sponsored. And so this was through a nonprofit organization. I got the invitation to go, and I was sponsored to go. And so while you're there, so they pay for your flight, they pay for your accommodations while you stay there. So you stay in a hotel that's like I could see the Capitol building from my window. It was awesome. And then all the meals were also provided. And so each night we would have like this convention with these different seminars, and we had breakout speakers that we could go to, and you had to dress in a suit, and it was like very formal. So definitely not my vibe, but it was a lot of fun. And I'm there, and this is mostly like older dudes, you know, like these are pastors of churches who like went to school with Noah, you know, like they're old, like ancient people, all right? And I was like, I'm not that old yet. I was definitely one of the younger ones, and there was maybe like 2 or 3 other people who were born this century who were also there. And we started like connecting, and I remember there was this one night we're there. It was right after the convention, in between the breakout seminars, and between the seminars, they would have out in the hallway, like this lobby area, this huge spread of like delicious food that was catered in by like some of the these like top restaurants, amazing restaurants in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and just this incredible spread. And so I'm like, free food is precisely where you will find me at any event, okay? And I'm there, but it's not just like, oh, it's cheese and crackers. It's like, this stuff is like legit. It's the stuff, it's super French, and you can't pronounce any of what it is, but it's delicious. But all the older people are kind of like, they have the appetites of birds, so they're like, oh, 1 cracker and I'm good. 7 o'clock, time for bed, you know? And I'm sitting there, I'm just posted up at this table, just like, nom, 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 nom. Exactly. And there's like 1 or 2 other guys who are like kind of my age there. And we just find ourselves, we're just standing here for like 45 minutes. We're like, can you believe we're here? Isn't this crazy? I'm like, bro, I'm a youth pastor. Like, what am I even doing here? And I was just like, they just put me on a plane and they sent me here. And suits are weird and really constricting, right? But also like, look at this food. And like, we couldn't believe that it was free. And we were connecting over that blessing of like, can you, like, look at this spread. And it was free. I couldn't afford this, so they just paid for me. And I get to be here and I get to enjoy this, and tomorrow we're gonna have more of it. Can you believe this? And we were like getting silly about it. That's what it's talking about. When we are given grace as the church, what should we be doing? Our response when we get grace that is unmerited, that we don't deserve, when we are offered forgiveness, we are not called to take like, could you imagine like if the other guys came to start eating some of the food? I was like, no, This is mine. This is my food. I came here for free. What, did you pay to be here? Yeah, go. Like, this is my free food. Could you imagine? Like, could you imagine going to a buffet, like all you can eat sushi, all right? Going to a sushi place, and every time you go to like serve yourself sushi, somebody like slaps your hand. It's like, it's not for you. Who's it for? That is for me. That's my California roll. Yeah, that's my sushi. Like, can you imagine how that would be? If we're just hoarding all the grace and all the forgiveness and all the blessing and all the good things, all the wonder, all the love, it's mine. That's not what we're called to do as the church, and yet we do that. The moment that we are offered grace that we don't deserve, we go, ha, mine. But we're as if we've been given a finite amount of it, of like, don't let go of the grace. Don't spill the grace, because then you won't have any grace. It's given to us in abundance so that we can share, so that we can stand here in the middle of church and be like, can you freaking believe this? Huh? Like, do you have any idea the mistakes I've made? Do you have any idea what I've done? And yet I have the opportunity to just stand here and worship. I am the creature, he is the creator, and I get to just live my life worshiping him. And I get to spend eternity with him when I'm gone from this place and I'm made new and I'm given a perfect body and I'm living in perfect intimacy with him. Can you believe that we get to do that? That's what the church is supposed to respond with. That's how we are called to respond with that. We should not be hateful towards others or jealous of God's grace shown towards others. Rather, we must celebrate God's unfair grace and be the ones who deliver God's unfair grace to others. That's what you are called to do. The gift of the gospel is not merely here's the gift, receive it. It's here's the gift, receive it, and go. Go tell somebody about it. Go share with somebody about it. Go tell them how good the food is. Go tell them how nice the hotel accommodations are. Go tell them the plane ride sucked. Don't tell them that part. Go tell them about how good this is. Why, like, have you ever gone to a party and you were the only one there? No, because that's super lame and a little creepy. All right? Why are parties more fun with people? Because you all get to be there and be like, look how much fun we're having together. That's a good party. When we come here for vol ball and we have good food and everybody's dressed up and we're able to enjoy each other and we put the songs on and we're like, oh my gosh, this is my jam. This is my song. And we all start dancing and we're engaging with one another. That's church. You can get excited about it. You can get excited. You should get excited about grace. If you hear the gospel message and your response is, cool, I guess, you missed it. If you hear the gospel message, how you have been forgiven, not because you are good, but because he is good, and your response is, well, of course he forgave me. And I'm going to keep this grace and this blessing all to myself. You're doing it wrong. If you have been extended grace, if you have been given grace, if you have been offered forgiveness, and you're jealous when other people are offered that same grace and forgiveness, you're doing it wrong. God is the giver of all that is good. He is the giver of all grace, mercy, blessings, reward, forgiveness, eternal life, love, all that is good. He doesn't owe us anything. We are the creature, he is the creator. Yet, God in his grace has shown us unmerited favor. His love for us is unfair because we don't deserve it. But the grace of God flows into the unfairness of God. May we never be so foolish. May we never be so foolish to say to God that we want him to give us what we deserve. May that never be your prayer. Never say that prayer. God, I just want you to give what is owed to me. No, you don't. You do not want that. Do you know what you deserve? Do you understand what you deserve? Because here's the thing about God. God is not fair, but God is just. There is an attribute, his nature is just. But that attribute of justice means that something has to be done about sin. Because as soon as sin entered into the narrative, something needed to be done about sin. And as Paul tells us in the book of Romans, the wage of sin is death. Death needs to happen. And because of your sin, death is what you deserve. Because yes, God is loving, but God is also wrathful. If we're teaching the gospel and we're only focusing on love and his benevolence, but we're not focusing on wrath, you're being given the wrong idea of who God is. We're not giving you the full picture. God is love. Yes, God is wrath as well. God is not fair, but God is just. And justice requires for something to be done about sin. So don't ever pray for God to give you what you deserve. Because if you're thinking that, you have no idea what you deserve. Because of your sin, you deserve death. If anything is owed to you, it's death. Here's something I want to challenge you with, and you can take this with you. Make a list of all the things that God owes you. If you were to make a list of everything that God owes you, what would that list look like? Hold on, that was a trick question. R.C. Sproul puts it this way. He says, if we were to try to list everything God owes us, it would be the easiest task we were ever assigned, one we could complete in record time, because the truth is, he owes us nothing except his wrath as punishment for all our sins. That's the reality, and it's already been stated. God doesn't owe us anything. But if you were to write a list, if you were to make a list of everything that you owe God, what would that look like? If you were to wake up and just start writing a list of everything that you owe God, you would never stop writing that list because you would have to account for every breath that you take. You would have to account for every time your heart beats. You would have to account for every kind word. You would have to account for every conversation, every interaction, every limb that is still attached to your body and fully functional. You'd never stop writing that list. If you were to stop and list all the ways in which he has blessed you in ways that you don't deserve, you would never stop writing. That list would never end. It's part of our nature. It's part of our sinful nature. To use comparison, we compare to determine what is fair, or at least what our idea of fairness is in this life. We compare. Our sinful nature draws comparisons. Our sinful nature looks at other people and compares our lives to theirs. Grace doesn't. We compare. Grace does not compare. And so my challenge for you, my challenge for us as a ministry and as a church is to not live from comparison, but live from grace. If we could stop living from comparison, if we could stop allowing comparison to kill our contentment and instead create and develop the habit of living from a space of grace, how different could life look? How different could church look? How different could our communities look? If you've experienced God's grace, then live in gratitude, celebration, and faithfulness. If you've not experienced God's grace, he's extending that unfair offer of grace to you today. He wants you to follow him, and his reward for you is beautiful and it's eternal. Focus on that. When we remain focused on the ultimate reward, that it is beautiful, that it is good, and that is eternal, when that is our focus, we're not getting distracted by what others around us are receiving. When we're fully focused on the gift that we've been given, not because we earned it, not because we are good, but because he is good, because he is loving, because he is gracious. When we're focused on that and we're focused on eternity with him, We're not going to be distracted. We're not going to be focusing on what on what the people around us are doing, on the grace that they're receiving. So we're pointing and saying, wait, how come they're getting grace? I should get more grace. I should get more perfecter gifts. I should have giftier things. That's what we start saying. Because we live in comparison. Stop living in comparison and start living from a place of grace. And God, that's our prayer tonight. As we go into our small groups, may we be challenged with the idea of how can we be living from a space of grace and not comparison. And if we're going to be distracted and drawn to other people's situations, may it bring us to a space of celebration where together we can just celebrate together this unmerited favor that you have poured out lavishly upon us, not because we are deserving of it. None of us are deserving. That's the unifier. That's the thing that draws us together. May this never be a church where we come together and celebrate how perfect we are. May we simply come here and celebrate the grace that has been poured out to us because none of us deserve it. May we celebrate that grace and then take it a step further and share it with others. We thank you for loving us in ways that we will never comprehend or understand. It's in your name we pray tonight. Amen.